Yes, as you all know, and so during the registration form, this webinar is being recorded. Today we are having the 5th webinar of the ENFASYS project. This webinar will focus on the topic of developing and implementing system-based theories of change across scales. This is the agenda that you have all received. There is just a very, very short introduction about the project and the webinar. Then we will move towards more technical presentations, one from Domenico Dentoni on the systems mapping processes as an effort to build coordination among stakeholders across scales, and the second one from Maria Roglic about ENFASYS systems-based TOC methodology. Then we will go into 2 more experience-based presentations from the case studies, from 2 case studies of the ENFASYS project. One from France and Belgium that will be presented by Antoine, and one from Switzerland that will be presented by Rebecca. And finally, we will have a short presentation on system mapping and a co-design lab, again from Domenico. We will then wrap up and give you a few insights about the next dissemination activities of the project. Just a short overview of today's webinar. I would kindly ask you, whenever you have a question, to put it in the box for comments and questions, or you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation, and we will be more than happy to give you the floor to ask the question. Generally speaking, we will try to keep a few minutes after each presentation to ask questions, and also at the end of the webinar. If we will not have time to reply your questions during the webinar, we will take notes of the questions and try to come back to you by email. Very few details about the project. The project starting date was 1st of September 2022, so we are already 2.5 years into the project. It's 48 months, which means we still have 1.5 years to go. It is coordinated by Ilvo from Belgium, and it has a budget of 4.5 million euros. What is the project aims of ENFASYS? Well, the first one is to support the Green Deal, and in particular the Fund for Ambitions. It is to stimulate a just and robust transition to sustainable, productive, climate-neutral, biodiversity-friendly, and resilient farming systems. It is to strengthen the public strategies, so policies, and private strategies, the business models and the social innovations, to encourage farmers to change their production system, and to overcome the multiple lock-ins in current food system that prevent farmers from moving to sustainable farming systems. ENFASYS, I would say, is a quite complex project, both from a theoretical and practical point of view. So to shortening it only in 4 points, it makes no justice to the project. So you can also read about the project on the project website and on the deliverables that we have already released as a public deliverables. These are the partners participating in the project. Ilvo from Belgium, we have CEJA as well from Belgium, the Association of Balkanic Innovation, Gaia, MBS, which we have 2 presenters today, Nibio, UCL Louvain, that will also present their theory of change from their use case, Institut de l'Élevage IDEL, Cegas, Alma Mater Studiorum University of Bologna, Humboldt University, and FIBOL, that today Rebecca will present their case studies experience with the theory of change. This is the link to our website, and I would warmly suggest you to go there if you would like to see more information about the project. Now I will not waste any more time on this and give the floor to Domenico for the first presentation of today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davide, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and great to see many familiar faces. Let me share the PowerPoint that I've got here we go. Can you see?
Yes, we can.
Yes, perfect, excellent. So my role here today will be to give a sort of a helicopter view of the methodology that we have adopted for the project. And after me, Maria will go much more into depth into how this has been applied into the context of the project ENFASYS. So I will go through a number of concepts about what systems mapping processes are across scales, why we do so, and how we have organized it, let's say a little bit the philosophy behind doing this type of methodology. So first of all, what is systems mapping? Systems mapping is, broadly speaking, the co-creation of visual depictions of complex set of relationships, meaning drawing systems, really. In participatory settings, in particular, it entails the co-creation. So that means that it's not just one analyst that draws a set of relationships based on the literature or based on its own their own expertise, but it's about bringing together the voices of different stakeholders and together drawing what could be a wide variety of diagrams, maps, sketched models. There is a background in fairly all scientific literatures on systems mapping, ranging from engineering to arts and humanities. For, in particular, the participatory system mapping, I think that this paper that I'm citing here below by Sedlako provides an interesting insights into how these are organized in participatory settings. So why systems mapping matter for a European project that, as you have heard before, aims to support the Green Deal in the European Union and broadly speaking, sustainable transitions in food and agriculture. The importance of systems mapping, we think that it's very, very important, especially in today's political and business environment, because it helps to build shared understandings and visions between actors. And when these actors are far away from each other, both geographically, culturally, and politically, this becomes extremely important. What we have seen, and of course here I'm just showing images from what became known as the tractor revolt that took place in the past, demonstrations that took place in the past year and a half, 2 years across Europe, where fundamentally what is going on is that the territories or certain people within territories in rural areas feel disconnected from policy-making decisions that are occurring in centralized level, both at national and European level. So the ambition that we had in this project was not just to apply systems mapping in 1 or 2 settings or in a set of in a series of disconnecting settings, but actually to build a participatory process across local, regional, and pan-European scales. Before jumping into the process in itself, what are the tools that we have proposed in this 4-year project? We have proposed a combination of causal loop diagrams, which you see depicted here on the left of this simple matrix, and value network maps, which you see depicted on the right. And the logic of combining these maps was to have a phase, first of all, with stakeholders from a variety of stakeholder groups that first make sense of the problems that together they are facing in food and agriculture and in the broader socio-ecological context, and then analyzing which actors are involved and how these actors relate to each other to form structures, which can be structures of power, but also networks that can relate to how the problems look like. So after going through this phase of sense making, we engage in a exercise of envisioning with these stakeholders. What that means in particular is that based on their own representation of the problems, the stakeholders identified or discussed with each other a set of leverage points. And of course, this took place together with the project teams that helped facilitating and then analyzing the data that were produced through the systems mapping process. Not just identify the leverage points, but also identifying which actors and which resources associated to these leverage points can actually enact these leverage points. So when you look these shapes coming together, these are the possible coalitions that can actually enact the leverage points. So far we discussed about the tools of systems mapping, but in fact the real challenge comes with the process of systems mapping. So what actually occurs, all the things that need to occur before engaging into this exercise, during these workshops, and after. And this, I would say, is a quite complicated and also underrated exercise, because there's a lot of organizing that goes through in order to make the learning from this systems mapping exercise both representative of stakeholders, but also transformational in its potential towards a change of the current context. So before the workshops, there is questions that need to be tackled, such as who to invite, how do we actually encourage participation? Because of course you can imagine that stakeholders have plenty of other things to do that may conflict with dedicating time to these activities, and how you build trust relationships. How do you engage with stakeholders in a way that they believe that this exercise will help producing outcomes that are valuable to them individually and collectively. So how do you organize this during the workshops, online or in person? And we see that different case studies took different ways of approaching this. How long can be the stakeholder, these gatherings on systems mapping, and how broad should be the maps, and how detailed should be the maps? So these are all questions that we had to tackle in a variety of ways. And then after the workshops, there has to be a procedure to report back from these workshops, to analyze the data in individual case study level and comparative way, and how you follow up with participants so that they actually see the value of what has been done. So this is my last slide. In the specific context of the ENFASYS project, then the way we have organized this process has been to work, first of all, at a local system scale. So that means that, for example, what you will hear later, case studies in Hauts-de-France, in France, meaning at the almost, well, no, actually at the border with Belgium, and in Switzerland, and in another set of cases, there has been first some work of literature review and interviews and focus groups. This has fed into a discussion that took place with the stakeholders at the local scale. The learning from these cases leads to local actions and behavioral experiments. What has been learned from these local scales then is brought to a pan-European system scale. This is where the project now is. I mean, we are finishing to analyze what is happening at local system scale and learning across these cases in order to prepare for a pan-European system scales workshop, which then feeds into learning together with both business actors and policy actors in order to drive recommendations, which then are brought back to the local scale. So here actually there should be a couple of arrows that go back in order so that the local systems actors can actually learn from the process that took place at the European level. So I will pause it here because this is, as you can see, is very much hyperplane, but with Maria and then with the case studies, we went into so much depth into this. So I will leave the word to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Domenico. I think it makes a lot of sense to go to Maria's presentations before seeing if there are any questions, as it is following up on your presentation. Maria? We see your screen.
You're muted.
But we don't hear you.
Okay, I usually forget that. So hello, everybody. What I'll be doing is walking you through our systems and behavioral-based theory of change methodology, which actually forms the foundation of our approach. And building on Domenico's discussion, I'll focus on how we implemented these concepts in real-world settings. So as you can see from this landscape image here, our work actually involves understanding complex interconnections between different elements, much like how these fields, forests, and buildings, they create this cohesive landscape. Through our methodology, we aim to capture these relationships and to translate them into effective theories of change that drive meaningful environmental action. So I'm delighted to share insights and experiences on where we are in this process. So we're going to focus on the approach to the theories of change within ENFASYS. So first, I'll explain how theories of change actually serve as these critical bridges between systems mapping and strategic action, grounded in specific epistemological assumptions. Then I'll demonstrate how we actually link theory of change systems mapping tools like causal loop diagrams and value network maps to ensure that our approach captures the complexity rather than defaulting to linear thinking that usually occurs. And finally, I'll walk through our methodology, so from theoretical foundations to practical implementation, showing how we developed and adapted our approach across the 9 case studies to create an integrated framework for sustainable transitions. So our work is founded on a reflexive governance perspective, illustrated by these 3 overlapping circles, representing our core epistemological pillars. At the centers where systems thinking, participation, and continuous learning converge, we find reflexive governance, our guiding framework. So this integration creates co-created knowledge through iterative processes that actually embrace complexity. So looking at our 4 key assumptions. First, we recognize complexity and systems thinking, agricultural sustainability challenges that they involve nonlinear relationships where our theory of change must capture feedback loops and unintended consequences rather than simplify them away. The second is our constructivist and participatory approach, which emphasizes that knowledge is co-created with the stakeholders. Multiple perspectives construct theory of change through dialogue, whereby they recognize that those within the system best understand its dynamics. Thirdly, iterative learning and adaptation treats theory of change development as continuous probing and collective learning, rather than a one-off plan, allowing refinement as new insights emerge. And finally, our transdisciplinary integration actually blends scientific analysis with local knowledge, combining systems mapping with stakeholder workshops to yield a richer understanding across diverse case studies. So these principles, they're not just principles, they inform our methods. They fundamentally shape how we conceptualize sustainability transformation. So the ENFASYS theory of protocol provides a structured yet flexible process that all case studies followed in order to ensure methodological consistency while adapting to local context. So we began with orientate, where we establish context and map the current systems using causal loop diagrams and value network maps. This creates a shared understanding of the starting points and system dynamics among all stakeholders. In the prioritized phase, participants collectively identify and agree on key leverage points, those critical areas where intervention could actually catalyze transformation. This often involves interactive workshops with voting to build consensus. Antoine and Rebecca will tell you more about this. The strategized step then builds on these leverage points to co-design strategic interventions. Here, we develop the actual theory of change diagram, showing how specific actions could lead to desired outcomes. In the act phase, strategies are translated into concrete, short, mid, and long-term actions, with clear ownership of the action and timelines, operationalizing the theoretical framework. And finally, evaluate and enhance completes the cycle, where outcomes are validated and the theory of change is refined iteratively, embodying our commitment to reflexive practice and continuous learning. Throughout this process, each step builds upon the previous one, creating a local progression from system understanding to targeted action, all guided and embedded in stakeholder participation. However, as we implemented our stakeholder engagement protocol across different case studies, we discovered, as you all know, that one size does not fit all. Our central principle became methodological flexibility, as shown in the center of this diagram. So I'll walk you through the 4 key challenges that we'd faced and how we adapted our approach in each case. And this was a very challenging work that every single case study coordinator done in their case study, as Antoine and Rebecca would tell us more. So challenge number 1 was stakeholder engagement. It's shown in the top left corner. The number and background of participants, they differed significantly by case. In Serbia, for example, you had only 5 stakeholders that could actually attend, while other cases, they had more diverse representation. Our adaptation was to merge sessions when participation was limited. In Serbia, the team combined the oriented and theory of change workshops into a single session to make efficient use of the small groups time. In Greece, with 8 participants who were hesitant to actually use the mapping tools, facilitators shifted to an open discussion format instead of the planned sticky note exercises. Time. That was the second challenge. It involves unexpected limitations that actually forced deviations from our protocol. So we adapted by implementing online alternatives and restructuring sessions across the 5 bases mentioned before. In Ireland, an intended full-day in-person workshop was converted to a 2-hour online session at the last minute. To compensate, the facilitators, they introduced breakout rooms for focused discussion, an action list to conduct post-workshop follow-ups. Similarly, as Antoine will show us, the French-Belgium team, under tight scheduling, compiled an action list from prior discussions rather than holding a formal co-design session. Too much complexity was our third challenge. The system mapping tools, they provided difficult for some stakeholders to engage with effectively. So we adopted by simplifying tools when necessary. In the French case, participants found that the initial diagrams, they're too complex. So what the team did, they simplified the presentation and focused on straightforward lists of issues and solutions. The Switzerland took the opposite approach. And the challenge number 4 was actually process flexibility. So what does this mean? Our adaptation was actually to combine steps when appropriate, case specific. Some cases integrated the evaluate phase into earlier workshops or postponed it due to resource constraints. In Serbia's final phase, recast and evaluate, it was done online, and it was doubled as a catch-up to address gaps from prior steps rather than conducting a separate evaluation workshop. So all of these adjustments, they helped maintain momentum and relevance. So this circular diagram actually captures our complete methodological approach that was designed around 4 interconnected phases that operate as a continuous cycle. At the core are our shared epistemological assumptions, the foundation that informs every aspect of our work. These principles recognize complexity, they embrace participatory knowledge creation, and they commit to ongoing reflection. Moving outward, we begin with the orientate phase, where systems mapping and stakeholder engagement help understand the current landscape. This leads to prioritize phase, where we identify leverage points and engage in collective decision-making to determine where efforts will have the greatest impact, the ripple effect. This design phase allows developing strategic approaches and creating a theory of change that guides our implementation. And finally, in the implement phase, we move to action planning and establishing processes for iterative evaluation. What is critical is that this is not a linear process. The red circle represents continuous learning that flows throughout all phases, ensuring that we adapt based on emerging insights. Each colored section embodies a key principle. co-creation, participation, flexibility, and reflexivity. And this visual summary actually encapsulates how our methodology embraces complexity while providing a structured approach to developing what we call sustainable agricultural solutions. So to conclude, I'll walk you through where we are actually in our project timeline. As you can see, thanks to the gigantic work of the case study coordinators, we have successfully completed phase 1, where we finalized individual case study theories of change through participatory workshops with our stakeholders. And here we saw that methodology has proven effective in translating complex system data into actionable frameworks that actually strengthen engagement and foster shared understanding. Now we're in phase 2, the cross-case analysis. So what we're doing, we're synthesizing data across all cases. We're systematically coding the methodological adaptations that occurred in every single case study, as I showed before, and we're identifying common themes and differences. This critical synthesis helps us pinpoint which strategies are most robust across different contexts and where tailored approaches are necessary. This cross-scala perspective Domenico was referring to before. Looking ahead, we'll focus on refining the overall theory of change and disseminating, of course, our findings, both regarding the case studies, empirical outputs, methodological structuring, and we'll identify several key improvements for future application because this same methodology is currently being tested on the case study on environmental transition of one business school, which allows us to see how these methodologies can be enacted in an organizational setting. What I would say is that this project actually demonstrates how integrating systems thinking through participatory approaches creates more robust pathways towards sustainable agricultural transitions in an actionable way. And I'm looking forward to your questions because I went a bit far and there is a lot of complexity in this work. So that's all for me. I hope I'm good with timing.
You did well with time, Maria. Thank you.
Yay!
Okay, there is a question from Tobias on the chat. I would suggest you to read it and maybe to directly address it.
Okay, I'll type it.
No, you can address it now if you can see it. Otherwise, I can read it to you.
I stopped sharing the screen and I've lost you.
I can read it in the meantime. My question was that did you, or how often did you go back to the stakeholder map and update it as part of an iterative process? So was the stakeholder map a one-off artifact, or was it a living kind of map? Thank you.
So thank you. It's a very good question. So what is important to know is that in the orientate phase, we already had another working package team from Nibio, where we actually, throughout that working package, we did a first set of stakeholder mapping. So we've developed first causal loop diagrams and the value network maps. So that was, let's say, 2 years ago. And then throughout the evolution of work across other working packages where we did, let's say, policy workshops or business workshops, these maps were iteratively updated. So to answer your question, it was more of a living document that was being used for the case study coordinators as an analytical tool. So what we saw that based on the stakeholder structure, you use the systems mapping either as an analytical tool or as an empirical tool. But it really then depends on the case studies. But Antoine and Rebecca can go further with this.
Thank you, Maria. I don't see any other questions on the chat. Does maybe anybody else would like to ask a question to Maria? If not, we can move to the next presentation. Antoine or Diana will present you the TOC developed in case study 1. Antoine, I would give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Davide. Just trying to share my screen. Okay.
Yeah, we still see your screen, Mario. Maybe you need to somehow stop sharing. Oh, okay, perfect. All good, Antoine.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to Marija and Domenico for the really clear outline of the methodology. And I think there was some good elements around the adaptation of the methodology, and the question from Tobias was also interesting because it was the case in our case study to have this kind of iterative process around the system mapping, and it was necessary, otherwise we couldn't do the TOC process accordingly. And so today I want to present you the main findings around this methodology for case study 1, which is centered around the challenge for enhancing the adoption and environment effectiveness of AES, so the agri-environmental schemes, or AECM, which is also a common way of formulating it. And we're focusing on both territory from Hauts-de-France and Wallonia. So the France is the north-eastern part from France, and Wallonia is located in south of Belgium. And those territories are really close in terms of agricultural landscapes, features, but are also really different in terms of institutional, political, and administrative challenges they are encountering. And so this is why I think the course comparison inside this case study is already interesting to show. And just quickly, this is my team, Citra, in Louvain, Belgium. We are working on systemic transition around sustainability issues, around the Professor Philippe Barret. We're really keen on working on participative approaches in our research. So what is our research focus in case study 1? We study the CAP AECM framework, which is located at what we call the meso level, which is analytical level. We really like to study between farmers and the big policy strategies. And so we're focusing on the second pillar of the common agricultural policy, on around voluntary measures that are implemented by farmers towards biodiversity and climate objectives that are coordinated by the EU, but also by regional and political actors. And so we started from the context in Wallonia, which is the Walloon Rural Development Program that proposed a set of measures that farmers can opt for and get the subventions, and they can opt for specific measures around different thematics on grassland and arable land. And then we compare this context with what is proposed for the CAP AECM in France, and especially in the France region. And this is already quite different because they work with the system called the AECP program, so the environmental and climate projects that are coordinated and administrated by territorial actors, such as regional natural parks, and also different organizations such as the water agencies. And those AECP, they are focusing on specific environmentally sensitive areas that are mapped inside the territory of the region of France. And so this is quite different from how it works and how it is administrated in Wallonia and Belgium. And that was the main focus point, to compare both of these institutional designs that are really different and try to find common grounds, but also comparative advantages. And so as you can see on the map here for the Grand France, you have different environmental issues that are located in the specific sub-territories, such as the drinking water issue, biodiversity and erosion, and other environmental issues. And so what we did, Marija explained it really well around this process of mapping the causal loop and the systemic dynamics. And we did it with stakeholders, trying to identify also the barriers that are located inside these dynamics. And the main outcomes we looked at was the adoption rate of AECM or AES, but also looking at the environmental effectiveness, and also all sorts of governance processes that are hindering or pushing the effectiveness of this scheme. And so we identified as a key point previously with Diana, my colleague, the fact that the number of advisors, for instance, the administrative and coordinating power around farmers was really important, but that the system for administrating payment was quite complex, and it was limiting the adoption by farmers. And yeah, I will show you quite quickly how we simplify this huge diagram to go to our stakeholders, because it's what's needed for the case study workshop on the TOC, to present something really understandable for the stakeholders. And so we choose to organize the system in this line between the policy level to the macro level and the micro level, which is governed by farmers. And between those two levels, we find a lot of different roles that are occupied by different institutional stakeholders and administrative players, such as so the design of funding, the coordination, the monitoring and evaluation of these programs, the advising, which is really, really important for ACM, and also the transferring of knowledge by advisors, and finally the implementation of those services. And as you can see, also the big role played by controllers and administrative players that need to check if the set of requirements is correctly adopted by farmers. So that was the simplified version we presented to stakeholders during the workshop. And what we did with them was to highlight the leverage points and the strategic intervention directly on this simplified theoretical framework. And this allowed then us with Diana to take back those insights and put them back into the systemic map and the causal loop diagram we had designed before with stakeholders in previous packages. And so the leverage points, these are the blue ticks that you can see on the screen. But for me, it's mainly interesting to show you how they were translated into concrete interventions. And so that's the next point, coming from those leverage points to put back the strategic interventions on the case study network map. So the stakeholders map. So the main intervention, as you can see, that were pushed by stakeholders were the need of promoting more and providing more information and feedback on the agronomic and environmental benefits of ACM towards farmers. And so this can be located between the implementation by farmers, but also how the other farmers can be motivated towards adopting them. And then also it was highlighted as a main need to increase the trust around the schemes. And by doing that, one of the key elements was to be able to make mistakes, in fact, and be able to correct them when administrating the payments. And so the trust between administrative players and farmers was highlighted as a key intervention point. And then some concrete ideas around the design of ACM to develop, for instance, result-oriented and hybrid-oriented ACM, which Rebecca will talk a bit more later, I think. And also collective ACM design. This is done already for instance, in the Netherlands, so targeting specific environmental issues, farmers can get collectively in groups to attack those issues, and they get paid collectively with a supporting environment. And then another action point or strategic intervention that was mentioned was the need to link the cap allocation, so the budget allocation, towards the environmental ambition of the member states in agri-environmental schemes, which are not the same for every member state. But this is more on a policy scale. So when we try to do a theory of change process, we also see some policy outputs. And this is the integrated form of illustration of the theory of change, coming from, on the right, the causal loop diagram, and then what kind of leverage point we found, and which kind of strategic intervention can address those leverage points in the systems. And so you can see, for instance, the main line is promoting and providing information feedback on the ergonomic benefits of ACM that can be attached upon the information that is needed for ACM implementation and to the understanding of the environmental effectiveness of those schemes. Then we have some mixed transition between, for instance, the result-oriented schemes in red. As you may see, they are related to the need of higher environmental skills of control agencies, and also the need of in harmonization in data gathering, and so the accountability of progress made at farm level. And they contribute to different items in the causal loop diagram. And it's the same, in fact, for collective ACM programs, which are targeting the need for human resource to go with farmers and to help them implement those measures, but also the need for a better geographical targeting of specific issues at sub-territorial level. And finally, we have also this policy idea of linking the allocation of cap budget towards the ambition of the schemes that are proposed to farmers. And so the final step, as Marija explained, was to show the action, the operational action that can be taken by stakeholders in the short run. And so what we did is designing them with my colleague Diana, and then proposing them through an online survey to see if they were correlated with the elements that were showed during the workshop. And so, for instance, around the group of knowledge creation, we propose different types of action, including increasing local dissemination activities, training farmers through peer-to-peer exchanges, and increasing the research budget to show the effects of AECM. Then on the consultation around the procedure and set of requirements, different type of actions were proposed, including the fact of co-writing the set of requirements with AECM operators and farmers, and scheduled time for exchange between the ACP, so the coordinators of the agri-environmental and climate projects, and the controllers. And each time the responsible stakeholders were identified for each of the regional sub-contexts, so in France and Bologna. And then we asked people if this was relevant, feasible, and what is the current progress on both territories for those actions. And we did the same based on the strategic intervention for other items. And we're still trying to assess whether the progress is good or less advanced in the different regions. And then we also found some policy recommendation outside of the TOC and the actionable element at case study level. We found some policy recommendation and that can be advocated for the CAP design. And one of the main items was to say, okay, we need to better allocate the CAP budget towards member states. And we also need to involve the environmental sector in drawing up and amending the ACM schemes and eco-regime also. And then the Walloon player that is responsible for for coordinating and helping farmers in the advising part of AECM in Bologna is called Natagriwal, and they emitted some key and really practical recommendation for the administration in Bologna for this CAP cycle. And the main idea was to say, okay, now we need to stabilize the way we design those schemes and stop changing the rules, because farmers need stability. And then they also had a lot of ideas on how to improve the design for later CAP negotiation. But for now, they say, okay, we need to stabilize the systems, but we can still change some of the calibration so that farmers get a better understanding of how it works and how they can be involved in those schemes. Then there was also the need to improve the training for control agencies and to ensure that farmers are controlled equally between those that are adopting and not adopting AECM. And what was, I'm almost finished, really interesting also was to identify the trade-off between, for instance, the flexibility. So what kind of choice option farmer they have? Is there some package they can opt for in a really specific territorial level? Or is there, like in Bologna, a more broad proposition of AECM for which they can opt selectively? And this is related to the idea and the need for better targeting around the environmental issues. Then we also found, based on the discussions, that there is two types of AECM. Those that are more oriented towards the maintenance of grassland, for instance, and that are quite easy to implement and that farmers really like to adopt because it's easier to and less costly. But then the administration also mentioned we need to propose measures that are really advancing and pushing towards transition in practices, including in arable cropland areas. And it was not really the case, especially in Wallonia, where you present a unique set of AECM requirements, AECM list, and farmers can opt for the one they like. It's not always in those regions where we need transition practices because it's really intensive cropland activities. It's not in this region that we find the more adoption, and this is a problem. Then finally, the third trade-off we found was the need to choose between different kinds of design. And so you have the traditional design that is mainly mean-based, and which is helping farmers get towards those biodiversity and climate results. But you have some alternative design guiding farmers collectively to target specific issues at local scale, like in Hauts-de-France with the environmentally sensitive areas. And then you have those reason-based and hybrid schemes that are also really interested to make some progressive payments. And so the main idea we had after the process with Diana was to say, okay, cross-territorial analysis is really interesting, especially inside the case study, because we can identify comparative advantages and margins for increased adoption and environmental effectiveness. For instance, the main example was to say in Hauts-de-France, we have a really targeted approach towards environmentally sensitive areas, where in Bologna, we have a uniform set of AECM for arable and livestock farming. And so there is some room for the adaptation. And we think that this cross analysis it could be and can be expanded to other member states. We had a chat earlier this week with visionary representatives, and they said that, yeah, we have also this difference between Spain and Germany, for instance. So, and I think that the work of Marija and others is really interesting in comparing also different case studies between inside ENFASYS. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine.
If any question, if you want to come in contact with us, at Zeta, we're really keen on participative processes and so on. So if other people, new stakeholders around those territories, we are really interested in joining other people's in the other work package activity and policy recommendation.
Thank you, Antoine.
May I ask a question to Antoine?
Sure,
okay.
Cecilia.
So thanks a lot. I'm a PhD student right now, and I had conducted a case studies in Flanders, so in the other region up there. I mainly focus on stigmatized technology adoption. And I want to ask you, how did you balance the different perception and opinion of different stakeholders coming from different levels, so policy, representatives, and farmers? Because I found out that representatives like agricultural chambers or something like that have completely sometimes opposite opinion of a situation compared to farmers.
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia, for this really interesting point. We found that already also in Wallonia and other France, but what we decided to do, for instance, for the theory of change process was to, for one step, exclude the farmers from the discussion. And because we think it's better to have some specific room of discussion where people get on the same line, and then you can find some interesting outputs, and then taking those outputs and comparing them towards the farmer's perception. And that's what we did through the behavioral survey, which we're still trying to analyze. And we find some difference between what administrative and advising players propose and what is the perception of farmers, of course. But we think it's really more efficient if we get in the same room, for instance, administrative players and advisors. And it was the case from both Wallonia and other France representatives. They get along really good, and they find some interesting recommendation. And then amongst those, you can select the one that are most suitable that farmers can adopt and can accept. But yeah, it's also a challenge for us, and we're still trying to, and we have some reports about that to say, okay, you should include farmers at each point of discussion, but we don't think it's always relevant to have every actors in the same room. And Marija, you want to?
Yeah, so I think that this discussion that you are having, it's a reoccurring discussion that we have across European projects when we talk about different case studies. And it's really the question of translation work, whereby the exercise of stakeholder participation needs to take into account the translation process. Because, for example, what happened in building a theory of change process, you did a translation of from English scientific language with the research protocol. You had to first translate this research language into concrete actionable steps in building PowerPoint presentation in the language of the case study. And then you had a second translation process that meant that once you have developed these PowerPoint presentations and slides in your mother language, you need to translate them and do a further simplification process whereby the system map, whom you as a case study coordinator are working with as an analytical tool, becomes a sort of a prioritizing list. And then you go back, because it's a cyclical approach, whereby then you translate back into the scientific language.
I see that Lucy has raised her hand.
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks for this great presentation. And Domenico knows I am already convinced about system mapping in any case, but I'm really, the French speakers, they might know this book. People are getting more and more upset with actually participatory processes. You have lots of bias. You make people speak in a room, so it means that the one who speak the louder, that are most technically equipped, comfortable with speaking, they have the time to come. There are lots of biases all around, and it's not necessary. There is also, you could have a dictatorship of participation to some extent. And that's why I'm 100% convinced about system mapping as a tool for group work, but I'm much more cautious when it comes to discussions that are going to lead to decisions. There must be some vote at some point. Where does the sense making? So collective sense making is good, but then doesn't mean you should take it at face value for collective decision. Yeah, so that's more like big questions. And how did you approach these ones?
Yeah, so here, what is very important, like in the system mapping process, you have the orientate phase, and then you have the theory of change workshop in itself. And in the theory of change workshop, you focus on the places in the system where you want to intervene. So that's why within the protocol, which we'll probably publish at one certain point in time, you focus on what is the leverage points you as an actor within the system you want to act upon. And thereby this whole issue of stakeholdership participations, and the farmers are listened to, or they have different perspectives from the advisor, comes into play. Because what's going to happen? You are going to ask, as a case study coordinators, as a researcher, okay, this is our system. These are the feedback loops we want to focus on. But a feedback loop can have different intervention places. You can choose different leverage points based on different stakeholders' perspectives. So this is where you have a systems map, and then you zoom into different elements of the map when you're in the field, and then you zoom back out when you're all alone with your maps and the recordings and the photos and the whole big data set. Well, you know, the mess.
Let me add just one word, because I don't know how to raise my electronic hand. I'm so such a laggard. Anyways, this type of participatory processes, of course, do not substitute voting as we know it in a democratic process, hopefully, but will for sure influence, and they are influencing, how we bring attention to issues. So it does influence what is paid most attention and not. And we know that louder people that have more time and so on, bring their voice more. So I think that in these processes, that's why I think that facilitation is very underrated. So the decisions that, for example, Antoine has described in terms of separating the farmers from the Chamber of Commerce, that is a decision in order to protect and raise the voice of somebody, which when it's brought together with Chamber of Commerce, for example, it may be less represented, because we know that in the participation, politicians or people that speak as a profession tend to be louder than people that do things. So I think that is very important to consider. Facilitation is very underrated, and that's why I think that beyond systems mapping per se, how to organize the process makes a difference compared to the tools that are used.
Brilliant, thanks.
Thank you, Domenico. And generally, thank you for this insightful discussion. That's exactly what we would like to have more in this type of webinars. We are late. I think that nonetheless, it's more useful and appreciated to have these discussions rather than to stick to the timeline. So Rebecca, the floor is yours. And then after Rebecca, we have one last presentation. But again, if you have questions, please ask them here. I think we all have time to answer today. And if you need to leave, you can always check the recording if needed. Rebecca?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see your presentation.
Perfect. So should I speed up, like make it very short?
No,
we go over time.
No, I think we can go over time a bit.
Okay, good. Just to know that. Yeah, I can very much relate to the point that was just raised by Lucy about about the difficulty with the participatory process, and especially like in the sense that we are aiming, like that we need to reflect very carefully about the outcome of the process, the system that we have mapped, and that we are not taking this as a kind of this outcome as a complete reality of that is kind of shared by everyone, and that is can also be implied that we are trying to kind of come to a common ground on how the system looks like together, that this is the overarching aim. But I'd say that it's just not something that is possible, but that we see the tool rather as a tool to help us kind of identify interventions like places of where to intervene in the system, but always reflecting about the completeness, also the dynamics of the system, and also in like also the loops, like which loops get which weight and so on. Okay, I'm sorry, I should start with my presentation. So I will be talking about goal-oriented biodiversity promotion in Switzerland, and this is a joint work with colleagues from FIBL and with Pinia Pöytäniemi, who is also actually among the audience. So she joined us for in the realm of her master thesis. And yeah, I will go immediately into the topic. So what we are looking here at is similarly like what Antoine presented. We are also looking into the agri-environmental schemes in Switzerland. And just to tell you, the case studies in ENFASYS do not all focus on agri-environmental scheme. It's just the two. But the two case studies already kind of show how the implementation of the methodology can be quite different. And just as a short background, so you get a bit of an understanding what the agri-environmental schemes in Switzerland look like. So we have also like these basic requirements that farmers need to comply with in order to be eligible to receive farm payments that can therefore be compared with the conditionality requirements in the CAP, and they are also tied to environmental performance. And then you see, it's all in German, you don't need to be able to understand the text. You see 5 pillars, and I have added some numbers for some of the pillars, and those are the pillars that do relate to biodiversity, to the promotion of biodiversity on farmland. And the numbers that you see there relate to the budget that is allocated to those payments out of the whole farm payment budget. And the first pillar is about the biodiversity payments, which focus mainly on diversity of fauna and flora and genetic biodiversity. And then there's the landscape quality payments, which are not that directly linked with biodiversity promotion, but rather are regional projects that promote certain landscapes. So they can be related to biodiversity promotion, but not necessarily. And the last pillar that constitutes 26% of farm payments is related to production systems. And here again, we have more connection with biodiversity promotion, because here it's about farmers getting paid for changing production systems, for example, to organic production, use of less pesticides, promotion of soil fertility and reduced tillage, and so on, functional biodiversity, for example, also. As you all know, biodiversity is a huge and big topic. There's different measures for biodiversity. Also, when we're looking at biodiversity on farmland, there's different components to biodiversity. And I just would like to emphasize that with our case study, we're focusing on diversity of fauna and flora on farms. And yeah, a little bit of background, which is maybe even not necessary, because you all know that there is a need for action. Just to show that there is that there's also a need for action in Switzerland, and maybe it's even bigger than in other countries in Europe. This is I'm citing here the status report of on the achievement of environmental goals that have been decided for Swiss agriculture, and it's not that recent a publication. I know there has been other publications in the meantime confirming these results, and the message is basically that biodiversity goal has not been achieved, and generally biodiversity in Switzerland is in an unsatisfactory state and the losses are continuing. Yeah, probably nothing surprising. One explanation of why the previous schemes have not managed to improve biodiversity, not even to halt loss of biodiversity on farmland, is that they are mostly centered around measure-based approaches, meaning that farmers get paid for a predefined set of measures that they need to implement. And usually these measures are one-size-fits-all measures related to indicators that are just applied for all over Switzerland. Sometimes there's a variation for different regions, but generally it's just like related to those measures. And so there is this, and Antoine has already been talking about results-based schemes. Also, there is this idea also to change the rationale in the agri-environmental payments to actually pay farmers for the actual biodiversity that is on the fields. And these schemes can be described as results-based schemes. There is different definitions, different designs for such schemes. And we already do see some elements of results-based payments in our payment system, and that's also the case for other countries also in the CAP. But usually it's just a few elements, and it's not the whole rationale for all the farm payments. So we are collaborating with a pilot project in the canton of Zurich that is actually testing results-based payments with 29 farmers, and it's a nice opportunity to work with this case study because the 29 farmers are really taken out of the old system. So they don't receive any biodiversity payments anymore, but they do they fully are in this results-based system where goals are agreed at farm-specific level, and farmers are paid for the actual biodiversity quality on their land. So our objective is to actually study the feasibility and effectiveness of results-based and farm-specific biodiversity promotion. But we take this case study as the opportunity actually we want to learn from this pilot scheme to understand how policies need to be changed in order to transform towards more biodiversity-friendly farming, more generally speaking. So yeah, we also have been going through this participatory mapping process involving 15 stakeholders. So a bit of a different to Antoine's case is that we have involved a lot of farmers. So farming sector is very important for us. Has been an important actor in our in our group of stakeholders, as well as environmental NGOs, the public sector, and advisory services. What you can see is we are lacking completely the market, like the retail traders, and also the consumption side, which is also something that we have been struggling with and are reflecting on when we're looking at our data. It is related to the fact that we have a bit of a path dependency with the framing of our case study that is very much about policy focused and related to the introduction that I have just been giving you. So this is our causal loop diagram, and it's also complex and overwhelming, and you also don't need to be able to read all the single boxes. Don't worry, please. Maria has said that we have gone this different approach in actually kind of not simplifying the graph, but really going with the complex graph in the workshop. And we have dared doing so, maybe also because we had this opportunity that we had Pinia working with us with her master's thesis. She has really involved the stakeholders a lot in the process. So she has been conducting interviews with all the stakeholders, and there has been a validation survey. So there has been a lot going on before we actually went together into the workshop. And so people were quite familiar already with the causal loop diagram. Still, at the end, our conclusion was, this is overwhelming, it's too much, even in this situation. Yeah, so I don't want to explain in detail our system map. I want to emphasize more the outcome of the leverage point identification process for which this map was the basis. And we have identified when I say we, I mean our stakeholders, the 15 stakeholders have identified 5 leverage points, and I only put 3 on the list because 2 of the leverage points can be classified rather as interventions already themselves, and they directly belong to 2 of the leverage points that are on the list. And the leverage points are farmers' free capacity, which refers to the resources and namely finances and time that are needed to implement or test new practices. And this leverage point is influenced by profitability, by administrative effort and management flexibility. The second leverage point is about farmers' biodiversity and local ecological knowledge and skills, which refers to the specific understanding and skills that farmers need regarding the interactions between agricultural practices and natural ecosystems, including species diversity, ecological processes, and site-specific environmental factors. And here what we see is that this knowledge and skills is influenced by the motivation to promote biodiversity, also by their experience in actually implementing promoting practices, and of course also by advice they receive. The third leverage point is farmers' feeling of being respected and appreciated, which appear to be a very key leverage point. It refers to how farmers perceive their value in society, particularly in relation to their professional role in managing land. You could say that there is a special case in Switzerland because we have just voted on this biodiversity initiative last year. There's quite a polarization between nature conservation and agricultural production, but I think it's a factor. It's a theme that is also appearing a lot in other countries. And yeah, the factors that influence this leverage point are polarization of opinions, what I just referred to, financial compensation, management flexibility, and the consideration of farmers' local knowledge. So I would just like to shortly do a bit of an analysis on these leverage points and highlight how according to Meadows' theory of how to intervene in the system, how deep these leverage points could be classified. And when they are talking about deepness of leverage points, they mean how much effect do the leverage points actually have if an intervention is happening with that factor. And we see that this farmer's feeling of being respected and appreciated, referring to mindset paradigm out of which the system arises, seems to be a very deep leverage point. All of them could be classified as deep leverage points. Shallow leverage point would be the other types of leverage points, but this last one seems to be seems to have the deepest, the most deepness, whatever. Yeah. So I'm also running out of time. I guess I'm almost there. I just would like to show you what we found from the study that we have conducted, qualitative study that we have conducted with our case study farmers, about their motivation to get engaged in the results-based scheme, that this farmers' feeling of being respected and appreciated seems to be really an important theme. We have, of course, heard a lot of different aspects that are motivating factors for them to participate, but these 2 factors, flexibility and autonomy, have appeared everywhere. And flexibility refers to the possibility to adapt the practices to the site and therefore increase effectiveness of the measure. It also refers to the possibility to weigh up production and biodiversity promotion, which gives more possibilities to promote biodiversity within the cultivation, within the fields. Also, it gives more flexibility in adapting the biodiversity promotion to farm processes and to try out something new as well. Also gives incentives to improve and further develop. And these 2 factors also relate to this big theme of autonomy. And generally this topic of self-determination seems to be just super important when it comes to the motivation of farmers to get engaged with biodiversity promotion. And also that there is their own level of knowledge, their local knowledge that they already have based on the experience and just like the farming practices that they do every day, that this is considered. So to finalize, to conclude, I'd like to show how the theory of change in the end more or less looks like. On the left side, you see these 5 leverage points. So now you can see the 5 with a financial compensation for biodiversity promotion and farm-specific advice and training was not there on the list before. That was the ones that I meant. They are already some kind of interventions. And now I'd like to show the interventions that have been suggested by our stakeholder group. So basically financial compensation in order to compensate for yield loss and efforts, and also economic support for experimentation. It's also a theme that appeared in Antoine's presentation. And with this financial compensation, tying these financial payments to quality rather than measures seems to be important, and also including landscape aspects and ensuring connectivity of habitats. And then we see further down these different themes that are connected to knowledge, like training and advice. And what they all have in common is the important factor that there needs to be some kind of that farmers need to support it in translating the knowledge to their farm. That was a theme that appeared everywhere. And the last topic is that there need to be clear goals in farmer inclusion, which means that that farmers need to be involved in the development of the schemes, but also that there needs to be a clear, like, what is the goal here for the biodiversity promotion for my farm, and and that farmers are included in this negotiation process of what needs to be done on the farms. And with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Throughout your presentation, there have been some questions, but I see that they have been also answered in the chat. I don't know, Catherine, if you had the opportunity to read the answers to your questions, would you further ask something in relation to that?
Sorry, I'm just reading.
Okay, no problem.
So carry on with something else and I'll come back to you.
Okay, no problem. Then we can go to the last presentation, which I think it will be a quite short presentation from Domenico's side. And then we can conclude with some discussions and finish today's webinar. Domenico?
Sure. Can you see my slide?
Yes, it's only one slide.
Oh yeah, it is indeed one slide. We are running late, so I have adapted it on the go to keep it as quick and simple as possible. So this webinar was basically co-organized by our ENFASYS project communication team led by Davide, with the help of Sarah and the whole team of their organization, and our systems mapping and co-design lab. So here is a short introduction about who we are and what we do. We try to fundamentally bridge knowledge between a variety of projects, initiatives, coalitions that are using systems mapping and co-design to understand sustainable transitions and try to give shape to them. As we know, ENFASYS is not the only project that is engaging into this work. So we want to learn from other projects. So the 6 people that have co-founded it, including Carlo, Maria, that you heard today, Ramin, Robin, Rob, Timothy, and myself, have all worked on different projects in the past, and we created this lab as a way of keeping in touch with each other and continue to learn, and not only among ourselves, but also with all other participants. We all have academic background. We all engaged into an academic career so far, but we are very much engaged in action research and practice. So this is an informal and non-profit space to learn. The emphasis is to learn more than just advertise what we do. And we really want to position, compared to other systems thinking networks that are out there, at the nexus between theory and practice. So in practice, what does it mean is that we spend a lot of time writing and reflecting about our own actions along the way. We are co-sponsored by my Montpellier Business School and by in France and Creativo Design, that is a consultancy led by Ramin. And if you have interest in doing new projects together, or develop a project together, organize an event with to discuss similar researches, or co-sponsor our space so that we can do more fun activities, please follow us on LinkedIn, or this QR code should work, hopefully, and then you can learn more about us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Domenico. Okay, any questions? I see Catherine has a thumbs up. Catherine?
Yeah, so I get my video started here. Thanks for that. Really, really interesting. We had the pleasure of chatting to ENFASYS colleagues on Monday this week, and put together, actually, I now think I understood what is being done in ENFASYS, what the methods are that you use. And it's interesting because in Visionary, so one of the sister projects of ENFASYS, we also applied a similar thing, except that we just called it mental models. We just referred to mental model diagrams. And I kept wondering, oh, is this the same, or how is it different? And I've kind of shied away from the causal loops, because I always thought they need to be so perfect. They need to have the plus and the minuses, and they need to have, the loops and the feedbacks. And of course, our mental models also ended up being fairly messy, and I even found free floating Post-its. I was like, well, this needs to be linked. Come on, guys, you can't just have something. But, and also in the process of trying to make sense of much of this data. So my colleague, Jadi Hashim, has done a qualitative thematic analysis of it, but I'm trying to see now what can we do sort of semi-quantitatively. So it's super interesting what you're doing. And I might just get back in touch with Domenico and see about organizing almost like a learning workshop, because I've got a few other colleagues that are not in your lab, which, yeah, they also probably refer to mental models. So it may be worth just bringing those schools, I don't even want to call them schools, but those groups together to share some learning.
Oh, excellent. I mean, please contact me, contact us, and let's organize that, because this is indeed, learning across European project, I think, is particularly relevant, because we are working on the same space, and so we can really learn a lot and rapidly for the territories where we're living in. So let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that this webinar is bringing together also sister projects and projects with a similar approach. Okay, I don't see any other questions. As I said, the webinar is recorded and will be available from tomorrow on the project website. In general, we would like these type of webinars also to get people in contact with each other, so that discussions can be starting from this type of events. Thank you again, everybody. Sorry for being late, but as I said, I think sometimes content deserves more time. We are looking forward to see you in the next ENFASYS webinars that will take place already in April. We will release information about them in the upcoming weeks, and please keep following us on LinkedIn especially, and we will release there all the needed information. Thank you very much for joining us today, and looking forward to see you again. And we
Thank you.
In 1.5 hours.